we're so busy talking sometimes about the big tech giants that, I mean, there's so many other major players in this space. And one of them that isn't as well talked about, but is extremely well known in AI circles, is a company called Cohere. And they're a major AI startup that is in talks to raise money, an undisclosed amount right now, at a $6 billion valuation and bring ChatGPT-like capabilities to businesses. So Cohere's been around for several years, established in 2019 by former researchers at Alphabet, Google's parent company. And they build foundational language AI technology that allows businesses to incorporate some of these large language models into their work. And Cohere has already raised $170 million from big venture capital funds, but also notably, they are supported by some of the big luminaries in the AI space, including Geoff Hinton, who is one of the kind of godfathers of the field, and Fei-Fei is also a major, major player. What I thought was really notable about this announcement is not just the valuation itself, which is significant, but the company also has a stated focus for building for the enterprise, with an emphasis on actually real world applications for these type of conversational and language technologies. So Cohere is less talked about than some of the other heavyweights in this space, but they're worth paying attention to. Can you kind of walk us through why that is?
Yeah, I think you highlighted a good portion of it. I started paying attention to them right away because Geoff Hinton name was attached to it, as was Fei-Fei, as you said, in the Series A. So they raised, they did what 40 million Series A in 2021, and then they did 125 million Series B in 2022. So Geoff Hinton, we've talked about Hinton on the show before, but basically he was one of kind of the godfathers of modern AI, or the deep learning movement. He coined the phrase deep learning. And then him and a team of PhD students in 2011, 2012 proved the ability of neural nets and deep learning to do advanced image recognition with the ImageNet competition. He then formed a company, sold it to Google for $44 million, and went on to kind of work in Google Brain team there. So Hinton is a legend. And so when I first heard of Cohere years ago, and Hinton and Fei-Fei being associated with it, I was like, well, they're not going to be associated with anything that's not super legit. And I didn't really know the team behind Cohere or anything like that, but I just knew, well, Hinton's involved, it's got to be something worth paying attention to. So I started following along with Cohere and kind of making notes and subscribe to their content and just been keeping track of them. But then when you realize who Aidan Gomez is, so the CEO, one of the co-founders, and you start doing some back research on him, he was one of, I think there was 9 authors on Google in 2017 of the Attention Is All You Need paper, where they introduced the transformer, which is the architecture that underlies language models today. So what powers GPT and ChatGPT and all these things are Spark, Lambda. This breakthrough called transformers is what actually enabled this to occur. And Aidan Gomez, I believe, was the lead author on that paper, and Hinton was one of his advisors, I think, is the way it worked out. So Gomez, and I believe like 7 of the 9 people from that team actually all left Google in recent years to do their own thing. So Gomez took a lot of the learnings from what they were doing there and built Cohere to build a language model from the ground up, basically. So then you start kind of connecting the dots. It's like, okay, so transformers, I was just re-listening on the flight to San Francisco today. I was re-listening to the Lex Friedman interview with Andres Karpathy, who was the head of AI at Tesla, and just announced last week he's going back to OpenAI.
Yeah.
In that interview, Friedman said, like, what is the most monumental thing basically that has happened in AI in recent years, in your opinion? And he said the creation of the transformer. So it is a extremely important moment in the development of AI, and the advancement of what we're seeing in generative AI today is the creation of this transformer architecture. And so to know that Aidan Gomez was actually at the forefront of that and now building this company, those things alone make it worth following. And then for me, in kind of paying attention to what they've been doing, they've done some very interesting things from a marketing and branding perspective to try and educate people on how language models work and what they are, and the different ways to use them in marketing use cases, like content summarization is one of the big ones. So I don't know. I've just been following them. I've played it. You can get access to their playground. So just like OpenAI has a playground that you can get access to and test their language models, you can do the same thing with Cohere. So I've been doing that. I think probably 6 months ago or so, I got access to that. It's not as user friendly. Like I can definitely see it's built more for developers. The results certainly weren't as impressive as like playing around with ChatGPT or GPT-3 and OpenAI Playground. But the company and where they're going to me is very fascinating. And I believe they just announced, I know one interesting, they're agnostic in cloud. So they're not like OpenAI where they're going to do a deal only with Microsoft. So I believe they're already embedded with AWS SageMaker. I think you can actually use Cohere in Amazon SageMaker. And then I think they also have a deal with Google Cloud. And that article said it was rumored that Google's actually going to be one of the people investing in the next round. So yeah, long story short, I would pay attention to what Cohere is doing. I think it's a really smart company. Obviously, they have a density of talent there that seems to be getting better and better. And I think they're going to be a name people are going to hear over and over again in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, that's just a crazy amount of talent and pedigree from a company that most people probably outside the space probably haven't necessarily heard of or been following. Yeah. How do they kind of fit into the AI competitive landscape, so to speak, in your opinion?
Well, so you right now you have the companies that are building on top of language models. Like, again, I'm just going to generalize here, but let's say like Writer, Jasper, HyperWrite, WordTune. For the most part, they build on top of the APIs from people building the language models like OpenAI. Cohere would be a builder of language models. So they're building their own. They're not building on top of someone else's API. Now, I say generally because these AI writing tool companies are also trying to get into the building their own language model game because they don't want to be dependent upon any one API to do what they're doing. But yeah, I would say they're up there with like OpenAI. Anthropic, I think we talked about last week, that just took a big investment from Google as another player there. And then you have like Stability AI and Hugging Face that are kind of open sourcing these models so people can fine tune them and build on top of them. But yeah, there's probably like, I don't know, 8 to 10 major noteworthy companies right now in this space at different stages. And I think they're going to become very common names in the business world in the coming, year or two.
Yeah. So speaking of that, and kind of to wrap this topic up and our episode up, I wanted to end on getting your take about Cohere's focus on building for the enterprise. They mentioned this multiple times in interviews. The CEO is pretty adamant that, hey, like a lot of the things we're seeing out there in the usage of language models is great, but we're laser focused on real world use cases and building for business applications.
I think we've talked about this before. If not, I've said it in talks, but I believe that the near future for enterprises is going to be custom training models on their data. So the more blog posts, webinars, ebooks, white papers, videos, podcasts, if you think about the archive of all the content you have, to take a general model like GPT-3 and then train it on your corpus of knowledge specific to your organization, that's really valuable. Connected to your CRM database, now you have customer data infused into there. So the more proprietary data sources you can layer into these language models, multimodal too. So audio, video, images, text. If you think about your organization and all of that content you have, and the ability to have that also inform the outputs of these language models, I think that's critical. And it's where most of them are going to try and go. So it seems like Cohere is just going there first. They're not going to get distracted by trying to build like cute little chat interfaces that don't make much money. And, they're fun and they're useful, but they're flawed. I think they're just going to say, we're just going to bypass that whole thing and let's just go right to the value creation at the top level. It's an interesting play. I would invest if I had the opportunity. I'll say that. I think they're I think they're a major player and they're doing very smart things right now.